Welcome everyone to Boxing Scene Today. Not at the Pro Box Studios today. My broadcast partner's on the road. We're doing it all remote, but that doesn't change the boxing news. And some sad news today. Dwight Muhammad Qawi, great fighter in the light heavyweight, cruiserweight, and even heavyweight divisions, passing away at the age of 72 after what his family called a 5-year battle with dementia. But we want to give the Hall of Famer his flowers. To help me do that, Jimmy Smith alongside the champs, Chris Algieri, Paulie Malignaggi. Chris, you and I were talking off air about this. When you look at his career, man, you called it, and I agree completely, sneaky good. He fought some great names and some amazing fights.
Yeah, Jimmy. I remember. We all remember the first Holyfield fight, which is one of the best fights I've ever seen. 15 rounds of pure chaos, and it was really early in Evander's career. And Champ Paul, you always talk about this. Giving those younger guys a shot. Qawi did that with Evander. I think Evander, what was it, 12 or 13 fight at that time, and Qawi was the world world light heavyweight champion, and gave him a shot and really launched Evander's career. But even beyond that, I was looking at his record and, stopped Matthew Sad Muhammad twice, stopped Leon Spinks, was a light heavyweight and cruiserweight champion, almost came back from heavyweight after a short stint there. When you're 5'6.5", 5'7", heavyweight's really not where you should be. But he came back down to cruiserweight and almost won the cruiserweight title again. Lost a split decision, when he came back down. Really, really impressive career that I didn't realize was so good until I looked at it now that he's passed. And I've obviously watched him fight, watch his style, love it. It's really, really fun to watch. But in terms of his accomplishments, he's right up there and is truly deserving of the Hall of Fame status.
Paul, you talk about it all the time. We talk about Muhammad Ali and his place in all-time greatness. You go, yeah, but there's an emotional attachment to Muhammad Ali that kind of makes him far and above anybody else in the mind of a lot of fans. Kawhi's one of those guys who gave us so much in the ring. He is a Hall of Famer. He deserves it. But this idea that he has a place in our hearts that not a lot of boxers get to, despite how technically good they are, Paulie.
Yeah, with Qawi, I think there's also a human element to it. He did some time in jail. He, sort of changed his life around, and really brought the positivity out in his life through boxing. It's a quintessential boxing textbook story, but you know, most of them are sad stories. Like this is sort of the stereotypical boxing saved my life kind of thing. And with Qawi, learning to box in a raw way. And then, he ended up, I think he took the example of James Scott, who was in Rawway as a world ready contender. And then he came back and beat Scott, who was, again, a contender while he was in jail at the time. I feel like they should still do this. They should have a penitentiary boxing system that would give guys a chance to, sort of put themselves in a positive situation. I know Hopkins also came out of a system like that, so they're definitely when they eliminated that aspect of it, they definitely eliminated some potential life-saving situation from people that are incarcerated. But being that Cowboy is of the old school, he came from this system, and really had to overcome constantly the odds. Again, a 5'6.5" light heavyweight and cruiserweight champion, unheard of today. Maybe probably will never happen again. Leaves Rahway State Prison after 5 years and says, you know what, okay, I boxed there, I'm going to turn pro. And he starts out 1-1-1, so he's not really, he's not as great a journeyman lane soon. But then he runs over, reels off a bunch of wins in a row, and then he gets a title shot with Saad Muhammad and stops him, and all of a sudden, before you know it, he's in the world championship picture as a world champion. And then he fought in a light heavyweight, cruiserweight, and heavyweight eras that are pretty solid. He lost in a unification fight to Michael Spinks, which is obviously no harm done there. Then he goes to cruiserweight and he wins a championship and loses it to Evander Holyfield, who eventually himself unified those titles. And then he goes to heavyweight and he wins up against George Foreman. It's like this of
Yeah.
Muhammad Qawi. He's a big, bouldering, menacing, giant heavyweight, and Qawi's this, small, guy coming from the small weight class. And he toughed that one out too. He got stopped, but and then like the champ said, he went back down to cruiserweight and gave it another shot after Holyfield had left the cruiserweight division and left some hardware there. Figured, what, maybe I would try and grab some hardware back over there again. Came up just short. So, he was fun. In terms of his style, he was in your face because he had to be. He was small. He fought a lot of top guys and gave them a run for their money and beat some of them. And then, like you said, he gave the next guy in line a shot, right? So it's like, today, imagine giving a guy like Holyfield who's got 13, 14 pro fights, a world title fight, when you've already established yourself as a champion, you've already fought Michael Spinks in the light heavyweight division, you've been a unified champion, and now you're just going to give this guy with 13, 14 pro fights a shot. Today, these guys don't have the balls to do that. They'll look to avoid that any way they can. If the guy's as promising as a Holyfield that he's got 13, 14 fights, they'll give you the old cliche, what does he represent? Nobody knows him, yada yada yada. That's why boxing was so great in this era, and that's why guys like Dwight Muhammad Qawi really need to be appreciated because they entertained and then they searched for the entertaining fights as well. They didn't just entertain when they were in the ring. When they were outside the ring, they also looked for the entertaining matchups to continue to on that run.
What I'm curious about.
I made a mistake. Yeah. Sorry, I made a mistake earlier. That was Holyfield's 12th pro fight when he fought.
not even
the first time. So I misspoke.
Yeah. But Chris, when I say this sometimes, that when you watch athletics at the elite level, there are two things you watch. Number one is somebody doing something you could never do in a million years. When I watch Michael Jordan put on 50 in a freaking game, I'm like, I could never ever come anywhere near that. The other thing is to watch somebody who maybe could be you, that you identify with, that it's a blue-collar, hard-working, not the most athletic person on earth, over-accomplish, go beyond what we believe they could do. Qawi was also one of those guys where we could kind of go, yeah, I see myself in that guy.
Everyone loves an underdog. It is why the Rocky series was so popular, aside from being just a great film. But the idea that it's a Rocky story, literally, that became a moniker. And Qawi has that. Like the champ said, he came from the prison system, spent 5 years in jail. And Jimmy, we spoke about this off air. Right? 5 years is most guys' primes. And this guy comes out, never boxed before. It wasn't like he went into the system, was like, oh, I'm going to be a boxer. No. He found boxing in the prison system, came out and turned pro immediately. And then for him, you got a guy again. It's almost like a Rudy. You got this little guy. He's 5'7". He's fighting all these giants, all these guys who can really punch and box. And I'm thinking about even Leon Spinks, Matthew Sad Muhammad. They're tall, long, powerful punchers.
And Leon has been heavyweight champion.
Yes, exactly. So like having a win and a stoppage win over Leon Spinks, and you got him, and he's sitting there, he's rolling under these shots, he's smiling because he's always mean mugging guys too. He was playing the mental game, so you really get, like you said earlier, Jimmy. There's a connection to him, and his style, and the fact that he's a come from behind guy, come from down and out situation, to really make good. And it's unfortunate. I think this happens a lot with fighters of yesteryear. You end up only only realizing who they are when they're already late in their career. Like I always think about, I always see the George Foreman fight, and I see him getting trounced by Foreman, getting clubbed with the right hands. But then now I look back and I'm looking at these other fights and thinking about the Leon Spinks fight. I watched the Matthew Sad Muhammad fights. Man, knocking out Matthew Sad Muhammad twice, that's a big deal. And his prime too. That's when Matthew Sad was on top of the sport, was the champion. So yeah, I think it's kind of good when these kind of things get brought up like this, when we do these kinds of shows, because then you go back and you can really appreciate what they were in their prime. Because unfortunately for me, being my age, I only think about him toward the end of his career when he was a shell of himself, rather than the world-class athlete that he was, beating guys that he probably shouldn't have. He's consistently an underdog, but finished on top.
It kind of reminds me of every now and then discussing somebody with someone of this era, like a Roy Jones Jr., and they'll go, I know Roy Jones Jr. I go, no, you don't. No, you don't. If you weren't there, no, you don't. You don't know what it's like seeing that for the first time live. Right. And the viciousness, Paulie, of his wars, not just with Holyfield, but in other fights, he once again battled dementia for about 5 years before he died. His family says he put up a brave fight against it, like a lot of fighters do. This idea that there were fights of his that rode that line between entertainment and you're uncomfortable watching because of what these guys are giving to the sport. That's the era in which he lived. Yes or no, Paulie?
Yeah, the era of masculinity, the era of the tough man, the era of be more man than him, like Apollo told Rocky in the Rocky 3, right?
Roberto Duran punching his groin after beating Sugar Ray. I'm more man than you. Same era, man.
Yeah, so this is sort of that era. Qawi fought in that era, so those kind of guys tended to want to put themselves on the line for a lot of reasons, not just for money or for, it's just because what they stood for, the kind of man they were, the kind of man they stood for, the principle of the fighter, of what he is and what he stands for and what he represents. This guy came from the 15-round era. I mean, you talk about
Yeah.
the damage taken. Those extra 3 rounds. There's a reason they don't do 15-round fights anymore. The guys are taking a lot of damage. There were deaths. There were massive brain injuries that they needed to diminish in the sport. So the reason the 15-round era eventually ended. But Qawi cut his teeth in the 15-round era against some all-time greats. It's both Spinks brothers, like you said. The talk about Holyfield, or Foreman, Saad Muhammad. I mean, this is just off the top of your head. And then had a solid run in 2 weight classes and even attempted the heavyweight division, where again those punches from Foreman couldn't have helped.
We were just discussing, obviously, Roberto Duran, the smallest of the 4 kings. This idea, Chris, that Qawi he fought in weight classes he really wasn't big enough for, right? Wanting to get above light heavyweight. When people talk about Roberto Duran, who's the only one to lose to all the other 4 kings, I go, yeah, he's a freaking lightweight. There's a reason why he was outgunned in a lot of those fights, but that's where you went for the money. Is Qawi one of those guys who might, man, maybe in a different era, or if he had settled at light heavyweight or something, going up to cruiserweight at once again 5'6.5" is absolutely insane, but that's what you had to do sometimes to get the big money fight, even though he became champion. This idea that being in the wrong weight class can hurt you, or being between weight classes can hurt you. What's your thought on this? That maybe he just had to fight bigger guys and might not have been equipped for a lot of that.
I don't know. I think that's the beauty of boxing, because you don't have to be anything. You don't have to be super fast. You don't have to be a knockout puncher. You don't have to be that athletic. Everyone can find a way for their own body type to be successful. And Qawi, listen, the guy's built like a fire hydrant. I mean, he's strong as an ox, obviously, but he had such smooth depth defense. He had that bob and weave style. It's very similar to Frazier, Joe Frazier, in the way that he kind of had that bob. Another shorter fighter fighting a lot of tall heavyweights who's able to go right underneath and throw that leaping left hook. Qawi, though, I think was a two-handed puncher. He could punch with both hands. With Frazier, you really think about his left hook. Qawi was a menacing guy who beat your body up. He beat the drum all night long. Still a good puncher at that weight. But even, listen, he said he had to move up from 175 because it was hurting him to make the weight. So heavily muscled guy, even though he's 5'6.5", fighting these giants, but he looked comfortable in there, man. I said he used to smile a lot. He would be dipping, doom, boom, 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 getting underneath those guys' shots, and he'd come up smiling, being like, "Oh, now you're tired. I'm gonna blast you," and he would. So I think he just found his niche or his style that worked for his body type, and he was damn good at it. When he was doing it at his best against these top flight guys, it was really impressive. And I was doing a little bit more deeper dive on his record. Another fighter that he lost to, Paul, late in his career was King Arthur Williams. King Arthur Williams was solid, super solid. He was much younger. And then the guy who you said he came out of prison 1-1-1. The guy who beat him twice afterwards. So Qawi got the revenge 2 times on that guy who beat him early in his career. So again, when you really do a deep dive on his record, it's really solid top to bottom.
Paulie, but before we wrap this up, I got to ask you, man, what are we losing with this era that's passing, right? Made it to 72 years old. That's impressive for a boxer who went through his damn. But what are we losing with, as you said, this era kind of passing right in front of us?
I'll tell you what, a lot of these guys, we like to use the word pioneers, right? And I'll tell you what, Qawi, one of the original cruiserweight champions, right? The cruiserweight division got created around that time. And you're going to say, maybe, if you want to be cynical, you're going to say, maybe he decided to go up to the cruiserweight division because it was a new weight class and, it wasn't that deep and maybe it was easy pickings. But then you look at the kind of fight he had with Holyfield and you say, well, you know what? Yeah. Maybe that could have been said. But then when Holyfield gets there and they fight that 15-round brutality of a fight, you say, man, okay, this guy earned his stripes as a champion, as a contender, as a multiple weight class champion, as a guy who's solidified his Hall of Fame status, not just with his own wins, but also with his battles against other Hall of Famers. I think from that perspective, you have a guy who you can really call a pioneer in the sport, and sometimes underrated because he's sort of, his name gets sort of lost in the mix because he came around in the late Ali, Ray Leonard era. Evander Holyfield came around and really became the name of that cruiserweight division, even though he took the title from Qawi, and then he went on to make a name for himself, the Tyson era. So Qawi kind of gets lost in that mix, but He's really, really a pioneer for today's cruiserweights for sure. I'd say for the cruiserweight division itself, a guy like Qawi becomes important because if you don't have guys like that in the early stages of the cruiserweight division, maybe it becomes a dud, and maybe it becomes like this bullcrap bridgerweight division that they just created, where they keep trying to create something here, but nobody gives a shit about it, you know? So the cruiserweight division, Qawi made you give a shit about it. Holyfield made you give a shit about it. These guys are pioneers of that weight class when they first got created.
Champ, you
Chris,
just made me
yeah,
think if there was no cruiserweight division at that time, we're probably not even talking about him. We're probably not even
Yeah,
talking
picked
about
heavyweight.
Kawhi. He's probably
yeah,
just he's a
yeah.
one-time light heavyweight champion. He moves up to heavyweight. He's too small for this current era because the guys are just too big. I think he would have been fine in the 70s as a heavyweight because look at Joe Frazier, very very similar build in terms stylistically as well. He probably would have been okay, but once you get into the 80s, these guys are too big, and
Frazier the
even
giant
George
compared to Qawi. Frazier the giant compared to Qawi.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing. So like this guy might not have been able to do anything if there was not for the cruiserweight division coming up when it did. And you're absolutely right. It absolutely pioneer and a division that's actually really important now. If we look at it,
Yeah,
cruiserweight division
yeah.
is one of our
And he's a big reason
better.
for that.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I agree. Definitely a pioneer in the sport and in those heavier weight classes that are not heavyweight.
Chris, are we, and I'm putting you in my generation, I'm a little bit older than you guys, the last generation that kind of looks back the way the generations before us did. And what I mean by that, I rode away to a place one time years ago in the 90s that would send you like a package of homemade DVDs for a particular fighter. And they would have all that fighters, you'd send them $20 and they would send you all of those fights. I remember I got Hagler, I got a bunch of the guys I grew up watching when I was a little kid, stuff like that. But if you mentioned Carlos Monzon, whose reign was when I was, an infant, I know who that was because I made an effort to watch his fights and how amazing he was and all that stuff. Are we the last generation that does that? And we're losing that a little bit as we're losing people like Qawi that we know, even though he was fighting when we were kids, we still know who he is and we still appreciate him. Is that going away?
I hate to admit it, but I only can say that because I've seen it firsthand in the gyms.
Yeah.
Because I've been in the gyms, more recent than in the boxing gyms, more recent than you guys have.
Right.
Just because I've retired later, but these younger guys really don't know the generations even right before them. It's unfortunate, and I think you're right. I think our generation or guys around our age are the last ones to actually look back. And also, I did the same thing. So KO magazine back in the day, they used to have a little
Yeah.
page and you could pick the fights. You drew on the page, you ripped it out, and you mailed it in. You sent a check, and they mailed you DVDs. I did that.
You remember that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I got Oscar De La Hoya's entire career and his gold medal matches and his Olympic matches. I got Sugar Ray Leonard. I got Arturo Gatti. Like those are my favorite fighters to watch back then. So I used to mail those in. But yeah, you just don't see that much with this generation of these younger guys coming up. But even my nephew, like he's kind of an old head. He watches a lot of old stuff and he brings it up to other guys. So it's not lost. It's not lost. There's still an opportunity, especially because you can watch everything on YouTube. These young guys don't understand how easy it is for them now. You look at us; we're cutting things out of magazines and mailing them in. These kids can literally just go on YouTube and watch these fights, and they still don't. So it's right at their fingertips. It's right in their pocket. So I don't think it's completely lost. I think we just got to get shows like this will get people more interested in kind of looking in the past. This is why we love doing these throwback shows.
Yeah, we do. And I hope everybody watching takes a look at Dwight Muhammad Qawi and his incredible career. Rest in peace to a great Hall of Famer. Of course, hope his family is doing well. But Boxing Scene Today, as it makes news, we'll deal with it right here. As always, join us. Find out when millions are watching.